You know, this is a video that I really didn't want to make, and yet here I am recording it. I think that I should start off with a little bit of backstory. I've been streaming games on Twitch for over 10 years now. And one of the games that I streamed a whole lot of was a game called Rimworld. One of the reasons I got into it was because I was mildly curious about it, because I'd heard of it through a game called Dwarf Fortress. Dwarf Fortress was a game that at the time I hadn't streamed, but I had played or tried to play for a number of years at that point. I didn't properly learn the game until a couple of years later. While I did know how to play the game well enough to be able to function, I wasn't particularly good at it. I could keep a couple dwarves alive for a season or two, and then they'd eventually die to some unspeakable horror, and then I would move on with my day and go play another game. Even though it was a game I was playing in the background, I still wanted more of that. I wanted the opportunity to play more Dwarf Fortress and games that were like Dwarf Fortress, and there wasn't really anything else like that. I was that person. I did read the Bay 12 forums, mostly a lurker. I would read the updates and occasionally look at the other posts relating to Dwarf Fortress and would read news that would pop up about it, but I never really had the opportunity to play a good deal of it because I was terrible at it back then. Now, this was 10 years ago, admittedly. At this point, I'm quite good at the game. But back in 2014, 2013, and 2012, when I was trying to learn Dwarf Fortress initially, I kept bouncing off of it. Until I saw this. Now, you're going to have to bear with me here because this post has been updated a couple of times, but this is the very first time I ever heard of Rimworld. This was posted back in September 15th, 2013. I think I saw this thread a day or two after it was originally posted. And this thread talks about this, posted by Tynan Sylvester. And it says, I've been working on this little project for a little while now. I just put up the first video, and I figured it was a good time to tell people it existed. This is one of the first pieces of press or awareness the video game Rimworld ever got. This is a post on the Bay 12 forums. At the time, Dwarf Fortress was a completely free ASCII game updated by two brothers who were largely doing it solely funding themselves off of donations and getting by developing their video game. Now, this game was a game that would later go to Kickstarter, as you can see higher up in this thread. Right here in October 2014, nearly a year after this original post was made, he took the time to go back and update it with the Greenlight post and the Kickstarter, and also the fancier trailer, of course. And then again came back in 2016 to announce that it had launched on Steam. The thing that you need to realize here is the very first response comes in from Astral, who's a Bay watcher, member of the Bay 12 forums, and says, obligatory creating an account and making your first post as an advertisement for your game is seen as rude in this community. I think that the existence of Rimworld has been very beneficial to Dwarf Fortress. It has provided an avenue for many people to realize that it is a kind of game they like. It made the term Dwarf Fortress less mythical and more immediately understandable to a much larger audience, which I do think has benefited Dwarf Fortress in the long run. Rising tide raises all ships kind of thing. The longer games exist and continue to sell, the more games that can exist in that space. And I do think that largely the existence of Rimworld has been a positive for Dwarf Fortress, as a massive fan of Dwarf Fortress. I continued to stream Rimworld throughout its early access, a little bit pre-Steam, because I didn't have money to back the Kickstarter at the time. I was simply watching other people play it. Played it once it launched on Steam quite heavily, enjoyed it quite a lot throughout its early access, started to enjoy it less as the game became what I felt at the time to be unnecessarily edgy, but at the same time, entertaining. I enjoyed it. It was a good time. I liked playing it kind of as a story builder, the way I would attempt to play Dwarf Fortress, except with the science fiction theme. And I did enjoy playing Rimworld for quite some time. In fact, I have about 3,000 hours on Steam logged on the game, although I don't think that that's entirely accurate because Steam's time counting wasn't as accurate back then. And I also had a DRM-free version of the game. My history with Rimworld is quite long. Not quite as long as my history with Dwarf Fortress, but it's still there, and it's still something that rests heavy in my mind. It's a game that I have a lot of respect for. It's a game that I'm happy exists, and it's a game that I also have a lot of disagreements with. As it neared the end of its development, by that I mean its early access development, it got to a point where I didn't want to play it anymore. It wasn't that the game was bad, it was just being balanced in a direction I didn't like. I like being able to abuse bugs and mess with things and create the narrative of my choosing on the difficulty I enjoy playing. Rimworld balanced itself in a way that made it harder for people who liked to play it like that. The longer it stayed in development and the closer it got to 1.0, the more of the little tricks and things that I enjoyed about the game and the randomness that I enjoyed about the game was removed. Specifically, fear mechanics is one that I missed dearly. So it got to the point where I would have to mod the game to continue playing it the way I wanted to. And roughly 6 months after Rimworld's launch, I kind of didn't want to play the game anymore because there was rumors of a DLC in the works, and I didn't really want to pay for a DLC that had mechanics that I didn't necessarily want to play with to only have my mods not work so that I couldn't play the game the way I wanted. And at the time, as a streamer, most of what the audience wanted to see was Twitch-integrated Rimworld, which wasn't something I enjoyed at all. So I decided to step away and not play the game so much anymore. And finally decided to say, to heck with it. And I started streaming Dwarf Fortress. All I could think about was Dwarf Fortress, and the only game I really wanted to play was Dwarf Fortress. Dwarf Fortress started doing quite well for me, and that brings us up to current day, where I have this well-built YouTube channel and a well-built Twitch stream. My main association with Rimworld at this point, even though I don't stream the game anymore, is through charity events. My team that I work with, Halcyon Frequency, you can find our website in the description if you want, halcyonfrequency.com. We run charity events, one with Rimworld and one with Dwarf Fortress. We raise money by passing a save file down the line. If you play Dwarf Fortress, it's basically just a succession game. If you haven't heard of the concept, it's like a marathon race where you take the save file and you pass it to the next streamer and everybody raises money for a similar cause. We've raised over $400,000 for Doctors Without Borders. Most of you who follow this channel are probably aware that Adventure Mode is finally getting updated to Premium. Fortress Mode was one of 2 modes that launched properly with the Steam version back in 2022 for Dwarf Fortress. And that is, of course, the Colony Builder mode and the mode that lets you read all of the history of your entire world. So this has been quite some time coming. We've been waiting for this patch for a while. And Dwarf Fortress doesn't have any DLC. And Dwarf Fortress also doesn't get a large amount of creator coverage, which means any major update is super important to the health of the game, that being the player base and the audience. Because a large update is an opportunity for traditional outlets to write stories about the game, for people like me to do well streaming the game, for other people who haven't played the game in a while to come back and see what's new and try the new mode and maybe try the improvements to the other modes that have been made over the past year, and also an opportunity for new people to discover the game. However, if that doesn't get a good amount of traffic, that can lower the amount of discoverability a game like this gets. And because Dwarf Fortress makes money off of their Patreon, of course, but also the success and sales of the game itself, these large updates are very important to the health of the game. Dwarf Fortress Adventure Mode is releasing into the beta branch on the 17th of next month, that being April. And Rimworld, the game that owes a large portion of its success to the existence of Dwarf Fortress, has single-handedly destroyed that with a tweet. So yesterday, Rimworld's developer, Tynan Sylvester, posted this. He says, "It will awaken." When Tynan does this, it means roughly 3 weeks to a month from the time that he's posting this, a DLC is going to release for Rimworld. And then, today, at the time of recording, he announces this. Rimworld Anomaly. Faux post. Awaken the monolith and face the squealing flesh beasts, invisible hunters and mind-controlling parasites, mad cultists, and the world-swallowing abyssal darkness, and capture monsters in your containment facility, and perform psychic rituals, and survive the madness. Well, this does seem awesome. Dwarf Fortress Adventure Mode releases in a month. This is the Steam page for Rimworld Anomaly. If this is releasing in 1 month, it will be releasing either the day before, or 2 days before, or a day before Adventure Mode. So it'll either release on the 15th or the 16th. Rimworld is a game that, regardless of how important it is to the genre, regardless of how good of a game it is a game that exists because Dwarf Fortress exists, to a very large degree. It's a game that I got a lot of enjoyment out of during its early access period. It's a game that at one point I would have called it one of my favorite games. At this point, it's still up there. Like if I had to make a list of top 10, it's probably in there. But its balance has pushed me away. And its insistence on charging for updates in the format of expensive DLC packs has also really pushed me away. It's a game that's sold millions upon millions of copies. And it's a game that desperately needs to milk all of the money out of updates. The DLC isn't cheap. And the last one, at least in Canada, was almost as expensive as Dwarf Fortress. So this releasing is going to do two things. It's going to pull a large majority of people like me, influencers, YouTubers, Twitch streamers, who maybe would have played Dwarf Fortress out of curiosity, or more casual Dwarf Fortress players, or maybe somebody who played at launch, or somebody who's just been waiting for the whole thing to be complete. It's going to pull them away. Because Dwarf Fortress and Rimworld, especially within the streaming and content community, have a huge amount of crossover. The second thing that this is going to do is it's going to cost a lot of people who have interest in both games a lot of money. So people who have maybe only just discovered Dwarf Fortress now suddenly have, oh, do I buy Dwarf Fortress? Or do I buy this expensive DLC for a game that I already own? That's where we sit. It also likely means that the previous DLCs from Rimworld will have a discount, costing more money. I don't think that this is necessarily Tynan Sylvester and Ludian Studios doing something wrong. I don't think that this is a bad thing for an industry. I don't think this is going to damage Dwarf Fortress in the long term. But Dwarf Fortress is a game that exists based on sales of a base game, not DLC. At best, all I have to say is this is some brutal business engineering. One could even call it savvy. I kind of have to respect it. There was a lot of chatter in a couple different Discords that I take part in where people play games similar to me exist in. They were all talking about how excited they were for playing adventure mode, or even just returning to Dwarf Fortress and playing Fortress mode again because they were looking forward to an opportunity to play a game that they enjoyed for a bit. But Rimworld is a game that historically brings significantly higher traffic to streamers. And that conversation has almost entirely vanished overnight. People are already streaming Rimworld in the Unstable branch to see some of the new content because people want to see new things. It's a game that most of the people who own Dwarf Fortress also own. So in the short term, this is going to completely demolish almost all influencer chatter, almost all Twitch streamer chatter, and a lot of the YouTube content that you would have gotten had this not happened for another month or two. It's also going to hurt the potential sales of Dwarf Fortress around the launch of Adventure Mode, and also potentially hurt the streamer adoption of Adventure Mode until the next major update. At the end of the day, I gotta say, this just makes me really sad. So I've kind of lumped these two topics into one video. My history with Rimworld and why I stopped playing, which is an often asked one, and how Rimworld, a game that owes a lot of its success to Dwarf Fortress, is single-handedly cutting off all of the excitement, all of the public excitement around the biggest update that Dwarf Fortress has gotten since its initial launch on Steam. As a wise podcaster once said, fuck capitalism. Go home.